program happening tonight. The Giants are winning. I think it's 8-4. But this one's going to be better. We've got Eric Schmidt and James Cameron tonight. I'd like to thank them both for being here right now. Eric, I must say, I've known for 38 years. I'm not going to tell you exactly when we met. You can use your favorite search engine to look it up on the web, because most of the world's information is organized. That would be your choice. Beautiful. And anyway, so yes, Eric and I have been friends for a long time. It's a pleasure to be able to introduce him tonight. And Jim, I just met you tonight, and I can't speak for everyone in the room, but I'm sure I can speak for most of the people on the planet that we love your movies, and we're really glad that you care about tech. So thank you. And I'm going to prod Jim in advance because to talk a little bit about his content project up here tonight. So I'm sure you will, but there's some amazing things that they've done with content management. And given that I work for Microsoft, I just want to say that because I'm proud to say we collaborated with him, and we learned a lot. And he pushes people hard, and I think the conversation tonight will be one where we'll all learn something. Also, Accenture and UC Berkeley High School of Business for sponsoring the program tonight. Let's thank them. And as always, there are some prizes, and so we have great prizes tonight. We have a Sony Internet TV Blu-ray disc player, a Panasonic Bluetooth headsets. We have flip video cameras from Cisco. We have speakers from Altec Lansing, and we have autographed DVDs of James's latest works. And Fenwick & West is going to sponsor all of those gifts, so thank Fenwick & West very much. All right, the winners will be announced, of course, at the end of the evening after the program. Tonight really marks the kickoff of an anniversary year for the Churchill Club. This is 25 years now that the club's been in existence, and I think there are probably many people here who've been coming for nearly 25 years, so we thank you for that. And it's a real pleasure. This whole upcoming year, there'll be a whole host of exciting new programs, and so tonight is really the kickoff for that. And again, I don't think we could be happier about the opportunity to have Eric and James here tonight. So let me introduce you to Karen Tucker, the CEO of the club. She's got some announcements to make, and then we'll begin the program. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all very much, and hello. So, 1985 was an important year of firsts. I know that some of you in the audience were barely or even not yet born, so you have no memories of that time, but then the others that Daniel was referring to who've been coming for 25 years, well, we're a little more advanced. How about this for one, though? Windows 1.0 was introduced in 1985. It only came on floppy disks, and you had to have DOS to install it. And desktop publishing was introduced. Before that, if you wanted something typed, you had to use a typewriter. And also in 1985, the wreck of the Titanic was located, which set the stage for an innovative filmmaker to create one of the most successful films of all time. And that same year, two 20-somethings, Rich Karlgaard and Tony Perkins, were inspired to create a nonprofit forum where business, politics, and academia could meet, a place where important people say important things. They chose Winston Churchill as a namesake because he personified many of the entrepreneurial qualities that we here in Silicon Valley hold so dear: intellect, curiosity, determination, willingness to take risks, willingness to fail, pick ourselves back up again. And Churchill did all of those things. He was serious, but he wasn't exactly reverent at all times. For instance, he got around using the word lie, which was banned in the House of Commons, with the phrase terminological inexactitude. And as Michael Perkins put it, our club historian, Churchill had a keen nose for things in the bud and displayed flashes of deep insight, and we all want more of that, right? So the Churchill Club was born at Silicon Valley Bank Tony's employer at the time, and thankfully the bank's executives turned a blind eye to the telephone line at the bank that was repurposed and answered Churchill Club and the flyers that were cranked out on bank copiers to promote the Churchill events. Rich and Tony put on their first program in November of 1985. Bob Noyce, the co-founder of Intel, was the speaker, and he delivered an impassioned view about open trade and memory chips, which at the time was a very controversial issue, and 250 people attended that first program. Some of them agreed with his views, and others vehemently did not. They still talk about it to this day. But regardless of where the people in that room stood on the issue, they walked out with fresh perspectives and fresh ideas. And I have to say that that set the tone for the many Churchill Club programs that were to follow. In honor of this venerable organization's 25 years of service, we sought a new symbol that would acknowledge history while taking us beyond today. And we chose the bowler hat. You might ask, why the humble bowler? Sure, it has long been associated with Winston Churchill, but we chose it as our symbol because of the hat's history itself. At one time, hats separated classes. You had, crowns on queens, top hats on gentry, the flat caps on the trade workers, and that's how it was. And in the mid-1800s, the egalitarian bowler debuted, and soon you saw it on politicians, coal miners' heads, Peruvian women in the Andes, cowboys. It's the hat that won the West. All of those different people were united by one common act, and that was embracing the modern, embracing a modern symbol. So we love it as a symbol of moving on from old ways, and I have to say that I love it because I think it's really cool. So here's our bowler in a talk bubble. It shows our obsession with igniting the freshest possible conversations among the top innovators and the leaders and the thinkers of our time. And I want to thank Gwen Francis Design Group and the creative team there who created this new symbol that captures our essence so well. And now I tip my hat to all of you, because I believe the people in this audience are some of the ones who are driving industry and innovation forward. So I thank you for listening and for continuing the conversation in the present and into the future. And now our valued board member, Jeff Herbst, who was instrumental in bringing this program into being, is going to come up and introduce our moderator. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. My name is Jeff Herbst. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for NVIDIA. And obviously people know we're involved with 3D, so I have very special interest in what's going to happen tonight. I've also been a board member of the Churchill Club for a little over a year, and I really, by the way, love the bowler hat, Karen. I think I was getting ready to move to a fedora, but I think the bowler is going to be it for me, so we're going to set some new style going forward just tonight. So let's all do it. Anyway, it's been a real honor to be part of the Churchill Club, and the bowler hat really represents the great history of this organization and all the great events that have come before this. And it's been really special to work with you, and I thank you so much for making this event happen. This was just a seed, a kernel of an idea we had probably around 9 months ago, and you had dogged determination to make sure we got this event off the ground. I think it's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it. I'd also like to put out a special thanks to Maria Wilhelm of Lightstorm Entertainment. You really shared our vision of what we could do with an event like this, so thank you so much, Maria. It's really, without you, this couldn't have happened. Anyway, my job tonight is to introduce Eric Schmidt, and this is actually a pretty hard job. Unless you've been living under a rock for the last several years, you probably already know a lot about Eric Schmidt. However, I'm going to try to add some value to this event, and maybe I'll tell you something you don't already know. And let me just warn you, after I introduce Eric, we're going to show a short film clip of Jim Cameron's work, so there'll be a little pause while we do that before we bring Eric up. Anyway, Eric Schmidt has helped grow Google from a Silicon Valley startup to a global enterprise. He joined the company 9.5 years ago after working as CEO at Novell. Eric's roots are deeply technical. He is educated as an engineer and a computer scientist. He was the chief technology officer at Sun Microsystems, and much earlier was a member of the research staff at Park and at Bell Labs. Eric serves on President Obama's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. He was elected to the National Academy of Engineering in 2006 and inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences as a fellow in 2007. Eric cares deeply about the present and future of energy and environmental policy, as well as ocean conservation. He and his wife, Wendy, formed the Schmidt Marine Science Research Institute in 2009. Along with Sergey Brin and Larry Page, Eric actually spoke at the Churchill Club in 2002, and his last appearance was in 2003. Before I bring Eric on stage, I'd like to show this short film clip, but I just want to say it's really a pleasure having you. Thank you for your continued interest in the Churchill Club and making this event a reality. This was really something that we really wanted to do so badly, and it's just great that we're finally here. So thank you, everybody, and let's roll the film clip, please. With that, please welcome Eric Schmidt.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you. I'm absolutely convinced that James Cameron, Jim, is the most important media creator, the most important director, the most important movie producer that we will see in our entire lives. It is a tremendous honor to have you with us today. You want to come on up? Now, so we're going to get to what is your encore? Well, let me tell you. Let's just review the list.
Oh my God.
Rambo, Aliens, The Terminator. Pretty good. That was in the 1980s. Right? So what are you going to do for an encore? Well, you do all of that. You get to know the governor pretty well before he was governor. Terminator 2, all the other things. By the way, learning about special effects, driving change in the industry. And then you decide to do Titanic, which makes the most amount of money any movie has ever made and gets the most number of Oscars. So then you think, okay, that's like the late 90s, what am I going to do next? And you think, what is the single riskiest thing I could possibly do? I will take every conceivable technical risk, I will put it into a single movie, and I will attempt to make money. And you do this, and you make a factor of 5 times more money than Titanic. You change the course of movie making in the future. My only question is, what's next? At this rate, the next movie is a $10 billion.
No. Well, thank you for that build-up. And by the way, no pressure at all. And I just want to say, before I answer your question, that I'm like incredibly honored to be here tonight with this room of people who are smarter and better educated than I am. And I'm certainly honored to be interviewed by you, Eric. I appreciate this very much. What's next? Well, I've just announced as of yesterday, I think it was in the trades today, that we're doing a second and third Avatar film, and I'm going to direct those. I've committed to write and direct those. And we're going to do them as a kind of conjoined production, where it'll be 4 years before we release the first one, and then the second one will come out a year later. So the second and third will form essentially the second and third acts of a greater story arc, but they'll also stand alone.
And tell us the plots.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And if you think I'm going to say that,
now
you could just show us your source code while you're at it.
And by the way, a lot of our source code is open source. So there.
Right. Well, that's true.
Okay.
That's true.
But anyway, getting up what people care about, which is Avatar. When I saw Avatar, I was struck by its beauty. And I mean as a beautiful thing. I don't know how else to express it, just as a truly genius work of art. And I told you when we first talked about it, that, for example, the colors, the flying scenes, the sense, all computer generated.
Yeah.
No one has ever done it at that scale. Give us a sense of what it took to put that together. How did you get the colors? How did you get the scenes together? What was the technology?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I'm writing it, I have a sense of the potential of what it could be, but it's all a big out-of-focus image. I'm feeling a sense of strong color. I don't know what the colors are yet, if I can describe it that way. So now, my first step is to work with the artists. And by artists, I'm not talking necessarily about CG artists. It starts with guys with pencils. And now they work primarily in Photoshop, and they do their paintings, their renderings in Photoshop. But you start playing with color, you start playing with form, you start designing the creatures and the plants and all those. And when the walls are covered with artwork, then I feel I can go write the script. I start with a story, then I challenge the artist to start showing me the world, and it slowly comes into focus. And once I know what the creatures look like and what the characters look like, then I wrote the script, because now I felt I could inhabit that world. And then the script, of course, is a starting point for a more conventional production paradigm where you cast actors and so on. But of course, many of our actors were not actually appearing on sets or appearing in front of a mechanical optical camera. They were being performance captured. And so, the biggest risk for us was that the performance capture component of it wasn't going to work, or not work up to a level of complete translation of the human emotional affect.
Of the many things that Avatar invented in the technology of movie making, you invented the thing you call performance capture, where people actually have suits on with dots.
Right.
And using lasers and other technology, you actually watch them move as humans, and then you map that onto CGI.
Sure.
What was the underlying technology insight that allowed you to do that?
Well, there was an early layer of foundation that we built on, and that was motion capture. And we'd used motion capture on Titanic, and it had been around before that, and it was basically a markered suit. And that allowed us to track the body motions of the actors, but it wasn't very good for capturing faces. And marker-based facial capture had been done for some time, but it was very kludgy. It didn't really work. So we came up with the idea of image-based capture, where we created a head rig with a little camera on it that actually basically just shot video of the actor's face. But it was nulled out. It was locked to them as they moved. So it created a kind of fixed data set of the displacement of all their facial muscles and their eyes and so on. And then it was all image analysis algorithms that were used to extract the drivers for the mesh of the CG character after that. But the thing that most people don't understand is it's not about capturing a perfect image of the face. It was actually somewhat sloppy. Sometimes the camera would move around. It was a flawed data set. What was important was to train the system to understand the actor. And we would do that by having the actors read the scenes for the movie in a kind of a matrix of like 12 HD cameras. So we understood how the actors' faces worked. And that cruder data set that we got in the moment when they were performing the scene was really just driving a very, very sophisticated rigging job on the CG character. So the CG character had accounted for all of the neuromuscular kind of system of the actor's face. And the funny part was, every actor was different. So it didn't matter who it was. You couldn't sort of spend 9 months doing one actor and then a month doing the others. It was 9 months for everybody. And curiously, it was 9 months. And before the character came to life, it was not a 9-month process.
But
Might
do you
have been
think,
10, but
I mean, again, you literally invented this. You're like the inventor of this technology.
we were
Do you think
converging a
that-
lot of stuff.
But all inventors use the work of others,
Yeah.
and then they synthesize in this extraordinary thing.
Exactly.
Do you believe that this technique will ultimately be a one-week technique that's broadly used? In other words, as it gets processed and other people learn from your
I think-
invention?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question, because I think there was this sense that, okay, Avatar is kind of showing how movies are going to get made. And I don't think movies are going to get made like Avatar, other than movies like Avatar, that are imaginative films that have quasi-human characters, whether they're, witches or werewolves or demons or aliens or whatever it is, but something that can be acted or performed by a human being. If it's a talking moose, doesn't need performance capture. It's going to be done by animators. And if it's closer to human than that, then simple makeup is sufficient. So it's always going to be a bit of a niche. But I think it's a niche that a lot of filmmakers are very interested in.
One of the other most beautiful scenes, in my view, are the flying scenes, when
Yeah.
they're off in the two animals, I guess, I don't know how to describe them, flying around, looking at each other in love. The flying scenes were actually shot on a rigging. They were literally on a fake animal,
Right.
in this bodysuit. So it was more than just faces that you had to mechanize.
We're capturing the bodies. It's a total facial body performance. And to have the actors perform flying a creature, I was never satisfied with how that had been done. I really wanted these to be the best flight scenes you've ever seen. I wanted you to have that sense of vertigo, of plummeting, and the sense of soaring and the beauty of it, as you say.
Which you
To
delivered.
me, the beauty was a critical part of the film. To me, the film was about contrasting grandeur and intimacy, and contrasting stark terror and absolute beauty, because I think that it's in these dynamic polarizations that we have a full experience.
One more question about technology before we move to some other things. You are clearly on record that stereoscopic imaging, dual cameras, 3D imaging is going to be everywhere.
Yeah.
Do you fundamentally believe this will occur, year, in a decade? Take us through how you've essentially popularized it at a level that no one has done before. So who's going to now make it a volume thing? How is it going to happen to my television? Why will all the cameras have two lenses, that sort of thing?
Right. Well, we see in 3D. It's how we see the world. And so much of our world right now is about screens, about monitors, and how we interact with data, how we sit at screens all day long, and then we go home, and for our relaxation, we watch screens. So this is it's our lives. So this
In our case, we sit in front of screens and relax
Yeah.
while we're typing.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes multiple screens.
That's right.
So if you can find a way to fundamentally rewrite the contract between human beings and their visual media, then I think that's something that is compelling. So I went down that path, and to me there are no barriers to 3D ubiquity in 5 to 10 years. I think a big breakthrough will be when it comes into the home, which initially will probably be driven by sports and gaming, but also, it could be episodic, broadcast programming and so on as well. The sets are there. The consumer electronic companies jumped out in front of it and got the sets out there. I think there's a couple of million of them that shipped just this year. Right now there's a dearth of content. So the content providers have to catch up, which means the networks have to start programming in 3D, and they're already coming to the various 3D content makers and saying, how do we do this? right? And so we're working with different networks in terms of how to get them up to speed and converting their product. It's all a little bit ahead of it right now, because I don't think, the big breakthrough is going to be when it's an auto-stereoscopic display that you can have in the home on a 50 or 60-inch monitor. And
What
you
does that
don't-
mean?
It means you don't need the glasses.
Okay.
So I think...
And how does that work technically?
Well, we're about 4 to 5 years away on that for a number of reasons. So much of the energy of display making has gone into higher frame rates, and now we're up to 240 hertz, and we'll probably go higher than that. And that's great for 3D with glasses, because it's a time series display, left eye, then right eye, then left eye.
Yeah, for those who don't, basically you see one image and then another, and there's a polarizing lens, which is what those glasses are.
Right, or
This
sometimes an
elim-
LCD shutter glasses, there's different ways of doing it. But what they need to go to is more pixels in the actual image matrix, in the actual area array, because they need to be able to decode to different viewer positions.
Yes.
Because right now you can have people in different viewer positions wearing the glasses, and the decoding is done by the glasses. Take the glasses away, you got to have sweet spots, and those sweet spots subdivide the total resolution on the screen. So there's breakthroughs in resolution, there's breakthroughs in actual display manufacturing that have to happen before we can have big displays for multiple viewers in the home. But I think when that happens, then it's good. Because small, like laptops are here now. Laptops are a single user paradigm for the most part. And so that's easy. That's already available. And smaller devices as well. So, as resolution comes, and these are all Moore's Law governed things. As resolution comes up, it'll just naturally evolve. So the biggest challenge right now is content. Teaching people how to make good content in 3D. Because the thing that'll hold it back, the biggest barrier I see, is poor quality 3D when people are being asked to pay extra for it. More for the displays, more for the movie ticket, whatever it is.
And it seems to me that another invention needs to be authoring systems for 3D gaming.
Exactly.
Because, as you know, gaming is driving a lot of the computer industry, and the volume point around gaming is a phenomenally lucrative one. for
Sure,
everybody.
sure. And it's a natural, so you have to make it comfortable, so because, it's not like watching a movie for 2 hours. Gamers will sit there for 8 hours, 10 hours. So it's got to be comfortable. And the thing that people need to uncouple in their minds, the technology of comfort from the authoring of good stereo, which is a set of creative functions that are actually within the image itself. You can run good stereo on a mediocre display or a mediocre system and have a great experience. And the converse is true as well.
And you were fortunate that the new 3D digital technology in movies was able to piggyback on top of the distribution of digital cameras in the first place, in
Right.
digital projection in movies.
Right.
So it made it cost effective
Right.
to have high quality 3D movie theaters that people could go to.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly accurate, but there's an interesting wrinkle to it, which is that when I got excited about 3D in 2000, I saw this coming wave or this coming rollout of digital cinema, and my assumption was it's going to happen anyway. The economics of it looked sound, but the movie industry dithered and kept pointing fingers at whose responsibility it was and got worried about security issues and encryption, and they slowed down. The logjam was actually broken by 3D. Well, I had always thought 3D would piggyback, and so I thought, okay, I'll just get all my ducks in a row ready for the big digital rollout, and we'll just sit on top of that. It turned out that the 3D actually was a catalyst that drove the rollout. So it actually was the tail wagging the dog.
So I'm sure, by the way, you're the only person in Hollywood who actually understands Moore's Law, which is great to have you part of this. Isn't that phenomenal? Think about it.
Thank you.
But let's talk a little bit now more about, I think the technology we can explore with other people's questions. Let's talk a little bit about the other part of, I think, your gift and the things that you care about, which has to do with the narrative. And Avatar can be understood as a narrative around ecology and tolerance and respect for other
Right.
ideas and societies and so forth. You clearly feel very strongly about that. You've been heavily involved in a project in Brazil involving indigenous
Right,
species, which
right.
was highlighted in the show.
And thank you for your help
Yeah,
on
we
that.
have Google help there a bit. Talk a little bit about why you care so much about that. What you would like all of us to do to help this. What is your sensibility, and why are you using your significant perch, I think, at this point, to make that? And I assume that successor avatars and other movies that you do in your long career will have this as an underlying theme.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that the key
And,
to...
you know, you invented a society, you invented a language. I mean, you were clearly pushing this as an underlying, in addition to having an excellent movie,
Yeah.
there was also a
Well,
teaching
thanks.
opportunity.
Well, I think it is, I think it's the power of cinema. I think that any movie can be a teaching moment. And, but you have to make sure that it's well wrapped up in a powerful entertainment. Otherwise, people just won't show up. So, first and foremost was good storytelling and good visuals and all that, and we spent, all those years developing the technology to do that. But at its core, I think part of the reason that the film succeeded and fell on fertile soil around the world in all cultures is that I think there's something right now in the human psyche and the human heart which acknowledges that we are becoming disconnected from nature and that we have a debt to the natural world and that we are on a precipice, and that if we don't take control of kind of our role and our stewardship of the planet, that the world that we bequeath to our children and our grandchildren is not going to be a livable place.
There's a report this week, by the way, that 20% of vertebrates are now in significant danger of extinction.
Right.
We are mathematically in the sixth extinction as best we can establish in the history of the world.
Yeah.
And at the rate at which we're going, we might be the last people to get extincted by our own extinction. So it's like a serious problem.
It's a serious problem. I mean, I've done tremendous amount of reading and study and talk to the experts. The beauty of being a filmmaker is you can actually just call people up, and in the guise of doing research for some movie project that never happens, you can go meet them and talk to them and get their wisdom firsthand. And I've been very concerned about energy for at least 12 or 13 years. I went completely off the grid solar with a 48 kW system myself in 2000, and so Avatar is as much an expression of my angst around these issues. But you talk about mass extinction. If global warming is left unchecked,
Which is the current plan.
which is the current plan, it's the business as usual plan is to do nothing.
It is the plan. I mean,
Yeah.
let's talk about it.
That's what our leaders have planned for us as of today.
It requires action to prevent it.
That's right. If that continues business as usual, as our leaders in Washington say is okay for us to do, we will have extincted 70% of the species on the planet by the end of the century. So to put that in perspective,
This century.
this century, exactly, 90 years from now, because of the temperature. When they talk about a temperature rise of 4 or 5 degrees on a global average, what they don't mention is that it's less toward the equator and some 3 times multiple of that toward the Arctic. So it creates enormous changes in wind currents and ocean currents and so on. And with the stress that human civilization is already putting on systems and the thresholds that we're passing almost on a daily basis, we're talking about 70% extinction. And to put that in perspective, that's as great as the Cretaceous-Tertiary boundary event, the comet that took out the dinosaurs, which was around 70% of species. So we're the comet this time. And instead of happening in a few seconds, it's happening over a period of a century.
Given that you spent a lot of time campaigning with your, again, significant voice, and I and others have as well, and we haven't made very much of a dent. There's a lot of awareness, but there's no action.
Right.
And awareness is not fixing the problem.
Right.
Do you have a suggestion for all of us as to what we need to do? Do you have a suggestion for what governments should be doing that should be doing differently? We're locked in a series of incumbencies around existing history, existing economics. There are people who, in my view, criminally doubt some of the science.
Yeah. I agree, criminally.
So,
I agree with that. Well, look, it's a very tough problem. Our leaders are our leaders, so-called leaders, are there to preserve their own power, primarily, and secondarily to maybe do some public good along the way if they can, but usually only for their own constituencies. So it always forms an us versus them kind of scenario. People, we need to evolve mentally and philosophically to something that's never existed before. We need to become techno-indigenous people of an entire Earth, not of a nation, not of a state, but of a planet. And I don't know how we do that. I mean, I think that maybe it's one of those tipping point things in a good way. You notice now that the rate of the rollout of solar power is the rate is accelerating very rapidly. It's been a very slow start, and the total percentage is still small, but the curve is starting to inflect upward. So I have to think that people of good conscience have to prevail you know. But I think it's, you know, education is an important factor. Challenging our leaders to be leaders is an important factor. Getting public buy-in. Right now they're in denial mode because of the economy, and it's natural. They've got to pay their mortgages and all that.
Well, you in fact have worked hard to defeat Prop 23.
Right.
Since we're about to have a vote, you might make sure everybody here understands your position, which is the same as mine.
Well, hopefully, this is a very informed group, so hopefully I'm preaching to the choir here, but Prop 23 is an attempt by Texas oil companies to derail existing clean energy legislation in California that was hard fought for and hard won, and is really a demonstration of national leadership, that if the other states just did what California did, we could obviate building 100 coal-fired power plants.
And in fact, the math indicates that the jobs that are created in the clean energy section in fact produce more economic returns than the jobs lost from the losing.
That's
right. So this is a classic incumbency versus innovators.
Sure.
We want to be on the side of the innovation because it's right for the planet.
Sure, 500,000 clean energy jobs in this state would be in jeopardy as a result of Prop 23, so that the biggest polluters in the state can essentially go on with business as usual.
Now, I know you're going to be spending the next 4 years working on Avatar 2 and 3 and all of that. What will you be doing in the area of environmentalism? You did a series of documentaries.
Sure.
You've been doing, again, using your movie-making studio, you've been doing a lot of things in that as well.
Yeah. Well, the Avatar films, I mean, so much needs to happen in the next 4 years. I can't wait for another Avatar film, so I have to take, you know, direct action. I've got to go out, I've got to talk, do things like going to Alberta and investigating the tar sands, draw media attention to problems that exist. I'm going to continue to do that. I'll make some documentary films, you know, in parallel with Avatar, and I'll just try to be a concerned citizen with a loud voice and bang the drum as long as people will listen to it. And I think that's a commitment that I'm making. I just have to time manage so that I can make a really hard movie at the same time.
There is no solution.
There's no solution. No, exactly.
Now, one of the other things that people probably don't know is that you've also built the most interesting and sophisticated cameras in the world. And you've done that for a series of, I think, perhaps instigated by your work in Titanic and Sphere and
Right.
The Abyss,
Right.
and so forth. But you've also done a set of marine documentaries.
Right.
You're also an avid scuba diver and so forth. Talk a little bit about the technology of cameras.
Yeah.
For this audience, a lot of people here do, CMOS imaging, those sorts of things.
Sure.
What's special about your cameras?
Well, what we chose to do was not to actually specialize in the sensor technology or the relationship between the sensor and the lensing. What we specialized in was a stereoscopic rig with that's servo-driven, software controlled, essentially a 9-axis motion control system that controls the positioning of the lenses in space in real time in dynamically changing situations. So as the camera gets closer to the subject, as the rig gets closer to the subject, the two cameras move closer to each other to manage the stereo space so it's watchable. And they tow in to do the same thing human vision does. So it was basically using sort of the guiding principles of human vision to drive a stereoscopic camera system.
And when you go underwater, what happens there with cameras?
All the same things, but you have to put it, you can imagine the optical problem of putting two separate lenses on two separate axes behind a common spherical section dome port. We had to create diopters that would allow them to not be differentially
deal with
distorted.
the distortion from
yeah,
the
so
water
you
and so forth.
get all kinds of chromatic aberration and all other kinds of distortion from that. So we had to do the interface optics so that it could go behind a pressure port, so we could take it down 2 or 3 miles to the Titanic or the Bismarck or the hydrothermal vents and do wide field stereoscopic imaging down there.
And one of the things that I've learned in my research about the oceans is that very little is known about the oceans.
Right.
So an example is that roughly 40% of the climate, CO2 recycling occurs at the surface of the ocean. And because of essentially the changes that is occurring, there is another mass extinction going on in the oceans.
The phytoplankton.
And essentially all of the little itty-bitty animals of one kind or another. That feed the middle part of the ocean, which is beneath the visible part of the ocean, roughly 1,000 feet to roughly 10,000 feet are all dying.
Yeah, the deep scattering layer.
It's called the pelagic zone.
Yeah.
And that this is a tragedy that's occurring without our knowing about it.
Right.
Because we can't see it.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that you're interested in is you're interested in deep diving. For example, you are working on a potential dive to the Challenger Deep, which is the deepest part of the ocean.
Right.
What are your aims with respect to the ocean? Is this to popularize the issues? Is this scientific?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a fair question. It's something I've had to analyze, and I went off and had a kind of retreat where I just thought about, this is a crossroads in my life. What are my goals? And I had been so adamant about exploration for so long. Space exploration. I was involved in various, space projects. I'm involved in the camera that's going on the Mars Science Laboratory with, the new Curiosity Rover. I was on the NASA Advisory Council. I was doing all this deep exploration. I thought, exploration is not as important as conservation right now. The oceans are dying faster than we're even understanding them. So while it's important to get in there and understand it, it's also important to change what we're doing to the oceans. Only a 2-degree temperature rise will take out most of the coral reefs. The coral reefs...
That's already happening.
That's happening.
In the next 20 years, virtually all the coral
Sure.
reefs will be bleached.
Sure, they'll be bleached out, and they're the breeding area for over a quarter of the pelagic fish. So we not only need to understand the oceans, but we need to have a stronger conservation. So I've actually sort of dialed down a lot of my exploration projects, and I'm now looking for ways to incorporate the zone that you talked about, 1,000 feet down to the surface, incorporate exploration and discovery in that area into a stewardship message in some documentary projects that I have in mind, including some television projects. So it's really a shift of focus from the deep.
Do you in fact want to go to the bottom of the ocean
we're
yourself?
doing that. We're doing that.
Are you going to do it yourself?
I'm 4 years down the line building this vehicle. I am going.
Okay. Now, for those of you that don't know, there's only been one vehicle in 1960 that managed to get to the absolute bottom.
Right.
It was on its way down at 37,000 feet down. At about 33,000 feet, it developed a crack. And the two gentlemen who were in it decided to keep going in a true feat of bravery. They touched on the bottom. They were down for about 5 seconds. They took a picture, and then they floated back up.
Yeah.
And the moment they got to the surface, this particular vehicle was taken apart so that no one would ever use it again, called the Trieste.
They never did that again, the Trieste. and
because it was so extraordinarily dangerous. And
Don Walsh and Jacques Picard. Don Walsh was a young lieutenant in the Navy. Jacques Picard was the son, actually, of the designer of the vehicle. And it was a big gasoline-filled underwater balloon. If you can imagine a hot air balloon with only a very mild change in specific gravity between the interior and the exterior, they used gasoline because that was the only thing they could find that would float in seawater at the bottom of the ocean, because the pressure is 16,000 pounds per square inch at 37,000 feet.
And in fact, the pressure is so great at the bottom of the ocean that the life forms that are there don't have skeletons at all, right? They literally are, think of them as just blobs of living tissue. And they're very, very large for that.
Yeah.
When you go to the bottom, what will happen, aside from hopefully you'll come back?
Well, we'll come back, because that's engineering.
Okay.
The engineering part I'm comfortable with, and we've already pressure tested our hull of our vehicle. It's seen those pressures already, and it passed with flying colors. So, but in terms of what we see, that's why we go, because we don't know. If we knew what was there, we wouldn't go. So we're going to see animals that have never been seen before. We're going to take samples. We want to, and not to throw what they did in 1960 with that much cruder technology at that time under the bus. That was an amazing feat. Right. But to go back now with a piloted mission makes sense if you're going to work with institutional partners to gather samples, have a good plan for the biology, and have a good plan for the geology and for the microbathymetry to map the whole trench system. And that we plan to make multiple dives and actually explore these deep trenches. There's the Mariana Trench, the Tonga Trench, there's the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest trench system in the Atlantic.
And in fact, I was surprised that roughly 97% of the ocean is completely unmapped.
Yeah.
There are roughly 1 million mountains that we know exist. That
This
no
must
one-
drive you crazy.
Yes, of course. And we do. And what's interesting is the reason that we know that they are there is because there's a satellite that determines what's underneath the ocean using magnetometry and gravitational forces, because that's literally the only thing that we can see. And obviously, it's so difficult to operate. We would love to get it mapped and put it inside of Google
It's
Ocean.
just hard to do. I mean, it's easier to map the surface of Mars because there's, the medium, you can see through it, and we can see through the atmosphere. We can map the terrestrial surface of the Earth. We just can't map the ocean so easily with remote sensing. We got to get down there in the water column. We got to drive around and mow the lawn and mosaic. the whole bottom, and that's why it hasn't been done. I mean, there's macro bathymetry on the whole ocean bottom. We sort of know where the mountains are, we know where the ridges are, but it's very coarse data set. And if we want to actually image it, we got to go down there with cameras and get either eyes on it or robotic cameras on it. And either one or both are great.
I think what we should do now is ask the audience for questions and comments. I think we've done a pretty good survey of at least the beginning of this
Great questions, by the way. Thanks.
This fine career. So how shall we do this? Do we want to do microphones? We have some microphones here in the audience. So maybe we can get a first question on what we've talked about or anything else. Questions for James? There's a hand over here and there's a hand over there.
Well, here's a volunteer right there.
Go ahead. And why don't you give the other mic to the next questioner, and then we'll go back and forth. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Hi. Thank you for coming, by the way. It's awesome. I recently read an article stating the top 20 most influential people in the entertainment business, and you were number one above all the billion-dollar studio
Pressure.
heads.
This is pressure, guys.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to feel good, though, right? Above all the billion-dollar studio heads and actors and actresses out there.
That's because he actually makes things.
Yes, that's true. That is true.
Silicon Valley is about making things.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes, and
He is
I'm wondering.
he is our analog in that world.
Yeah.
He makes things.
And I'm wondering why you think this is, why your movies and projects are so influential and really global, I guess.
Look, I mean, because it worked out, you know, but I think the question really begs, you know, what was the process before the fact? What did you think you were doing long before you knew it was going to work out? And for me, it's about challenging myself, trying to do something people haven't done before, and that comes from curiosity, really. I mean, all of the exploration stuff, wanting to go down and see what's at the bottom of the ocean, is the same thing as wanting to see something on a movie screen that couldn't exist before. And I have this, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, it's probably both, depending on, you know, what's happening in the moment. But when I think of something that I think is possible to do and hasn't been done before, I have to make it to see if it was possible, you know, to see if that presumption was right. And sometimes it comes out of conversation with engineers, sometimes it comes out of conversations with artists, but there's this switch that gets thrown. Okay, now I got to see it. Let's just do it. Let's do it, guys.
I can also answer his question on your behalf a little bit by saying, you know, that genius is 99% perspiration.
Exactly.
And what people don't talk about you and your work is how hard you worked on these things. Avatar was how many years in development? The shooting itself was 4 or so years.
Yeah.
You had to develop almost everything yourself, the entire platform. And these are 12-hour days, 7 days a week. Most people
12
don't work
hours,
that
I
hard.
wish it was 12 hours.
That's right. So not only do you, so my advice would be, if you're going to try to do this, you have to really love it.
Yeah.
And I think the characteristic of it is you really
That's
love
good.
it.
You know what, that's good, because I was having a really bad day down on the set in Wellington, New Zealand, and I was 2.5 years into the film, and it was just a meltdown. Everything was going wrong. We were going over budget, and we hadn't solved a bunch of technical problems, and I was just cranky with the whole crew, and I went home that night, and I woke up the next morning, I thought, you know, you did Titanic. You really didn't need to work again. If you did this to yourself again, there must be a reason. It's because you like it. So remember that you like it, you know?
That's great. That's great. A little self-talk lesson from Jim Cameron, which we can all apply. Yes, sir.
So, James, Chetan from Palo Alto. Has there been a project in your mind for all these years that you think the world is not yet ready for?
No, you know, I mean, I think the world is ready for anything that's good and fresh. And if I had something that I thought was, you know, something that was exactly the key, turning in the latch of 6.8 billion hearts and minds, I wouldn't tell you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I had a question. My name is Bruce Pittman. I'm from Cupertino. I guess one of the questions is kind of underlying a lot of the concerns that you have seems to be our ability to innovate and do things differently. You come from an arena, a part of the country where everybody is desperately trying to be innovative, you know, the way the last guy was.
Yeah, exactly.
How did you do that, particularly in the early part of your career, get through the innovation, and are there any lessons you have for the rest of us?
It's worth noting that Jim's originally from Canada and started off as a truck driver in America. So to the degree that this is the American dream, immigrant, moves to Southern California, takes advantage of the opportunities before him, and changes the world.
I was actually talking about that exact thing with the governor just this afternoon.
Another immigrant.
No, because it was the same thing for him.
Hard for you to call him the governor since he worked for
I
you?
always call him Arnold, you know, and then but I have
You
to
don't call
catch
him like the Terminator or the
No.
Governator or something? Hi, Governator, you know.
No, we've been friends for 26 years, so he's just Arnold. It's hard for me to call him the governor. But anyway, yeah, it's definitely that. And I think when you do come to Hollywood from the outside, as opposed to maybe coming up from the inside in some nepotistic way, I think you have an inferiority complex, and you do tend to work harder. And the other thing for me is that if you're going back to those things that I was mentioning before about challenge and about curiosity, it's not interesting to do what the last guys did. I think it's okay to do what you were talking about, Eric, and synthesize ideas, you know, kind of memes, ideas that are in other films. Make sure but it wouldn't be interesting to me to clone a formula. And I've never done that. And sometimes, you know, at my peril. I mean, The Abyss didn't make that much money, but you know, the other ones have more or less worked because they're, you know, fresh ideas. And if I can't think of a fresh idea, I'll make sure I get some people around me that can incubate some good ideas.
Let's get some more questions. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Jens. I'm here all the way actually from Helsinki, Finland. There's 3 tables of some of the best entrepreneurs in the Nordics here.
There's like 50
50
Finnish
Finns.
students here, right? Well, let's get a shout out from Finland. Come on.
We're the ones who weren't born in 1985. But anyway, a lot of us operate in the field of social media and communities and online. And this question goes to both of you. Eric,
Jim.
James.
Yeah.
You
Yes,
mentioned...
Jim. I think we can be Jim at this point.
Yeah, Jim.
It's James Cameron, and I'm interviewing.
The question, what I was about to say was that this goes to Eric and Jim. You said raising awareness is important. How do you see the current field that we're in? In the past 4 years, Facebook has grown, and all other social media online. Raising awareness, do you think that's going to only be awareness, or is it going to actually result in something?
I'm going to let you go first on that
Yeah,
one.
I think the general comment is that the world is moving to what I call a mobile-first world, where basically everybody is communicating and living with their mobile devices, whether they're phones or tablets and future devices, which will be of infinite power. And you'll live your life with phones that know a lot about you. This is with your permission, of course, where you are, what you're doing. Remember, it has an off button if you decide to. It's very important to know where the off button is in these things. But basically, you know, these phones roughly, because they're GPSs, right, they know roughly where you are, and they can provide you with some extraordinarily useful services. So in James's case, what he'll do is because he cares about the environment, he'll want real-time information about what's going on in the world of where he is. He lives on airplanes. He talks to people all the time. He wants to know right now. Right? And that's the kind of information that you can do with all of these things. And social media, which is a huge, huge phenomenon, of course, is another extension of that, because people want to know what's happening in communities and friends and so forth. And I think we're just at the beginning of this. I wouldn't call any of the current outcomes as final. I think they're just at the beginning. And if you look at 20 years of the earlier generations of technologies, whether they're PCs or the software industry and so forth, they changed enormously during this period. And I think it's an incredibly exciting part to be with.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that the potential for social media and social networking to really have an impact on governments, on policy at a global scale is phenomenal. If you look at the civil rights abuses in Iraq, following in Iran following the election last year, and what we learned about that was coming out under a complete official national news blackout, but we were learning about it anyway. I think that's important. I think that there's amazing potential there. I also think that, unfortunately, to a certain extent, it follows human psychology, and people tend to aggregate in groups of like-minded people. So where these tools could be used to have friends around the world and expand our cultural perspectives and so on, they tend to be used to find people like us and tell everybody like us what we did, and they tell us what they did, and we all pretend to care, And I just think that we sort of need to evolve a social conscience to map over all of this social networking so that these tools can be used effectively.
The most interesting debate, I think, is what happens when you have a vibrant community and a weak government. And I'm not talking about the US and China, both of which have different governments, but they're both strong. I'm talking about the majority of countries, in fact, which are kind of iffy on how much control the government has over the citizens and vice versa. And now all of a sudden you have this enormous invasion of empowerment to those individuals, and tools and platforms where they can discover the abuses of things going on around them. In Google Earth's case, Google Earth has been used now to get people to understand that behind that hill and behind that fence there is an environmental catastrophe occurring that you've never seen. And that changes behavior because it's local and it's actionable. And then using social tools and others, people can band together and put some pressure on the government.
I think the tools that you're making available now have incredible potential to allow us to look at these environmental infractions around the world, the deforestation in the Amazon. I mean, you look at a time series of images available on Google Earth. It's incredible, and real-time stuff. You have people who are they're basically they're living in a traditional way as indigenous people in the Amazon rainforest, where they fish with a bow from a dugout canoe, and yet they'll learn how to use the tools, the GPS tools on a laptop, so that they can report infractions where there's illegal logging and so on going on that's encroaching into their territories. There's actually a way now to bring it to a global consciousness and to force the government to actually act on its own laws. Because right now, the government will just turn a blind eye, because, and I'm talking about, let's say, the government in Brazil or Ecuador or wherever, because, there are big business interests, whether it's a big utility or a big logging company or a big, cattle, ranch or whatever it is. They'll turn a blind eye because it's good for the economy. But if they're confronted with the evidence, and the evidence is available on Google Earth, the science community can access it, the indigenous rights community can access it. It's the potential is incredible with these new apps to be able to really police this and create change.
Let's get some more questions. There was a question over here. Yes, Shannon, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, Shannon McEllier, Palo Alto. Just apropos to the last question, I think I'm getting unfriended a lot because instead of posting what I'm doing, I usually post what I care about in the whole world. But people say, stop it. But I was wondering, given there's an enormous amount of work to do in the oceans, mapping them and exploring them and education, are you collaborating with any other scientists and engineers? For instance, Graham Hawkes, who's here in the Bay Area, who has, he had created the flying submarine for Steve Fawcett.
Yeah, I know Graham. I actually worked with a couple of his subs. He created a sub about 15 years ago called the Deep Rovers, and I wound up buying 2 of them in a partnership, and we rebuilt them and operated them for a while. It was a really nice sub and a good research sub with a 1,000-meter capability. I haven't worked with Graham. I know Graham fairly well. I know his engineering. But the people that I tend to gravitate toward would be people like Woods Hole Oceanographic, who are doing some really cutting-edge engineering work with their kind of semi-autonomous vehicle that has dived robotically to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, and they've done spooling fiber systems that allow a continuous data, a control data stream back to the surface.
We should mention why that this is a big recent achievement by Hui.
Yeah.
They were actually able to
Big
get down there with a semi-autonomous robot.
Yeah. But yeah, and Hui, I think, represents a good balance between robotics, autonomous vehicles, controlled robotic, remotely piloted robotic vehicles, and piloted vehicles, because there's a role for all of those. And I firmly believe that you always keep a human being in the loop in exploration, because they're our front line. They're the people that are our eyes on of the experience of exploration. The second you take people completely out of it, I think you definitely lose something. You certainly lose a kind of romanticism of exploration, but you also lose a sense of us actually participating. And I think the greater collective public needs to feel that they're participating in exploration.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Can you
hi.
comment on your interest in the future of online immersive games?
Well, I love the potential for online immersive games, and you know, obviously, you know, you guys are doing quite a bit with that at Multiverse. But you know, in creating a world like the world of Pandora and the story world of Avatar, my goal would be to create a persistent world that people can visit in all forms. Now, we don't have an RPG up yet, but I want to do that.
Have you thought about the following? Rather than writing your Avatar 2 and 3, instead spend a year or two building an online community and then having the intelligence of that community suggest some new ideas, right? If your idea is that since movie making is so static, maybe with these new tools you could get the social network and ideas and learn from the way people live in a Pandora that's built as one of these multiplayer games.
I think that might have to wait for the next cycle, because I'm sort of already committed. I think if we realistically, if we do it in parallel, we can get, you know.
Well, you could do it in parallel.
We'll do it in parallel, and we'll
In
let
fact,
the ideas feed across, and that will somewhat.
I mean, you surely don't need any marketing help, but obviously, because you're so good at it. But obviously, if you have a set of people who spend 10 hours a day living in Pandora for 4 years, they're going to show up on the first night of your film.
And they're going to have legitimate opinions about what the characters should be thinking and
They
feeling.
will obsess about them.
Yeah, but that's okay. That's good. I think that in a cruder form, that's ultimately what started to happen with Star Trek, which is the fans started to strongly influence the making of the films, to the extent that you had one of the ultimate fans wind up directing one of the films and recreated the franchise in the last go-round with J.J. Abrams.
And remarkably well.
And very well, yeah, exactly. So I think that that's an interesting feedback loop to explore. It takes time to get these games up on their feet, as you know, and I hope to do that in parallel with the second film.
Let's get to a few more questions. Where are the mics? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Lakshmi.
Hi,
Patwari.
Lakshmi.
Hi, Lakshmi.
First of all, I would thank you for naming your movie Avatar, because the entire billion people of India is convinced we inspired you to name that. So
You
thank
did.
you for that.
You did, as long as I don't have to give a billion residual checks. I'll be happy.
Fortunately, we are very spiritual people. And So the question I have for you, Jim, is that one of the things that really runs deep in the movie is really cultural sensitivity, so to speak, which wasn't necessarily a thought process in the previous films. And as we evolve into a global world, we are meeting people from all over the world, etc. First of all, where did that come for you, and is that something that's going to continue in the future versions of Avatar also?
Right. Well, I'd just like to point out that Lakshmi was actually my guide my first trip to India recently, and really sort of, connected me with that country. But I'd already had the title before that.
And many more trips to come.
Right. No, I think that's a good question. It seemed to me so critical to, if you're going to do a story about going to another planet in a wonderful new world and create another culture, it's so important to tell the story of the culture shock and seeing that alien culture for who they are. Of course, there was a limit to how alien I could make them, because I needed to appeal to human cultures around the world to invest in the story of the Na'vi. But I thought that I tried to sum it up in this idea that I see you. Their greeting, turns out there's actually a tribe in Africa whose greeting is I see you, but I didn't know that. They'll probably sue me. But But the idea that it's not just I see you literally before me, I see, I see into you. I know who you are. I understand who you are. It can mean everything. I respect you. I love you. All of those things, depending on the social circumstance. And the movie begins and ends with the main character opening his eyes. And really it challenges the audience to open their eyes about other cultures, other religions, other ways of thought, other languages. Because the problems that face us now, really almost for the first time in human history, are global problems. We need to work together. We're all breathing the same air. The air that we all breathe is heating up. It's going to affect us all. We may think, oh, well, you know, I live in Minneapolis. It's pretty cold here in the winter. 5 degrees warmer would be a good thing. It's not going to be a good thing. You know, because you're going to send your sons off to fight in wars caused by food shortages, because there's, you know, 4 million people on the move in a famine caused by the temperature rise someplace else. It's all connected. So the movie tried to express the idea of the connectedness of all things and the connectedness of us to nature and of us to each other. Even though it was expressed across the cultural divide of alien and human, that doesn't matter, because, you know, science fiction is made for human beings, by human beings. It's for human consumption. So all the lessons, all the metaphors really apply human to human.
Our next question.
Hi, my name is Sharon. I'm off being an entrepreneur like both of you guys. You seem to...
Not yet.
Not yet. Definitely not yet. A long way to go. You seem to have a frightening amount of knowledge about each other's disciplines. And so I'm curious, when can we see you guys potentially working together?
Well, he's going to direct the next Avatar film, and I'm going to
Done.
run Google for a couple.
You heard it here first.
It's really terrible.
It would be great to, I mean,
James is threatening to take me down to the bottom of the ocean with him. That's literally what our conversation has been.
It's not a threat, it's a promise.
no, the question naturally is, or your organizations or yourselves, I mean, you seem to know a lot about each other's work, is the potential to create something together or working together?
Well, from a Google perspective, we have benefited by having truly brilliant and committed content people who can help us with our technology platforms. We're not any good at the content side, but we're very good at scalable platforms. What's unique about James is his ability to cross those worlds. There are very, very few people, and I've tried, trust me, I have tried, with whom you can have a conversation like this. This literally may be unique. There literally may be no other person besides James, which is sort of phenomenal.
Wow, thanks for that.
Yeah. Well, now let's see. We have.
Just if I could, there are some pretty smart people that you know, sort of propped me up and made Avatar what it was, and they have a foot in tech and a foot in storytelling, and a lot of them are in the visual effects world. And as you see people coming out of the visual effects world into the directing and storytelling, you're going to see a change in that regard.
It was interesting that you actually, when we talk about the way you produce the movies, you actually start with the pictures and the storyboards without even the script and the writers. And that's all now done digitally, right? With the digital artists that come out of Lucasfilm and the other sort of pioneers in this space.
Yeah, yeah. And we used our capture volume actually as our way of imagining a scene. Instead of actually doing storyboards in the conventional way, we just got in there with little models and flew them around and used the virtual camera and started creating the movie in a very kind of hands-on, interactive way that I think was kind of unprecedented.
Some more questions. Let's see, we had another, yes, over here. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Stuart, and I wanted to find out, there's actually a question for both of you. What was either a moment or a person that got you as aggressively involved in being Earth warriors and ocean warriors as you are?
Go ahead.
For me, it was Jacques Cousteau when I was a kid. You know, because he was doing the cool exploration, and they had those snappy silver wetsuits and those mini subs and stuff. But he also had this conscience, and there was a real gravitas to his presence. And when he seemed so genuinely mournful when something bad was happening to the animals, whether it was the dolphins or the coral reefs or whatever it was. And that was always a guide for me, to have a kind of a sense of responsibility to nature. And it started back then, and this was in the late 60s, and the origins of the environmental movement were right around then, late 60s, early 70s. And, so it was just the consciousness that I emerged from high school with. And I think the values that you form at that age are going to be with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
How about you?
In my case, Larry and Sergey, as founders of Google, had always been very sensitive to this, and I had not been. So they dragged me to one of these meetings where we talked about all of this, and somebody did a calculation about what is good for business was also good for the environment. And I thought, well, actually, I could actually do something. So we did an analysis of what we could do to save money at Google by better insulation, better stewardship of energy. And I became quite convinced that the environmental movement is making an error by making an emotional appeal rather than a hardcore dollars and cents argument. It is fundamentally good business to be green. It is good business as a CEO, and I say that with public company shareholders. It's good for the planet, and it's good independent of whether there's a cap and trade system and so forth. It saves money over the long term, and we're supposed to act as long-term stewards. And so one of the things I would say to everybody here in the room is that each of you is the CEO of your own economics, right? You make your own business decisions. Do the calculation, and you'll discover that it's better over a lifetime to invest in green yourself.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
For your personal transportation, for your home, everything. Yep.
Let's see, more questions. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Dana, and I'm with the San Jose Mercury News, but I'm not a reporter. It's okay. I'm actually going to cheat and ask 2 questions, if that's okay. As a huge fan of your directing and just having your images and your dreams kind of become a reality, which is, I believe, is a great accomplishment. What would you like your legacy to be with everything you've accomplished so far?
He's
aside
not
from
dead
going,
yet.
Well, I think he's just awesome. That's all.
He's got a lot of years ahead.
What would you like to be remembered for besides?
There's going to be a lot of incumbents voted out in a few days.
Besides essentially going to the bottom of the ocean, which will be phenomenal, but what would you like us to?
I think I get your question because if you think, I don't think in terms of legacy, but you do think in terms of what are your guiding principles. What would you like people to think you're standing for? I think curiosity, understanding, personal challenge, and social responsibility. And I'm trying to weave all those things together into the art that I create.
And by the way, you notice how that's not the expected answer? You would expect most successful director, most successful, largest revenue, and so forth. But as a model for leadership, his are a set of principles that are higher than that.
Well, thanks. I think that's what you have to do. I think you got to look
pretty
beyond.
interesting.
Again,
Let's see, more questions. Yes, sir. Over here.
Hi, my name is Tom Cran, and I must acknowledge that I'm a bit of a fatalist. Several years ago, I saw a movie, and James, I'm wondering if you've seen it, called The Day After Tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, for those who haven't seen it, it's about a cataclysmic event that changes the temperature of the Earth and moves the oceans. And my question really is, I see both of you as being very unusual in your advocacy of the environment, and I want to ask, what do you think is really going to have to happen to convince people in America and in China that we've got to do things differently, or we may face our own cataclysmic event?
So the movie, which was not nearly as successful as your movies,
some pretty bad science
was based on one of the theoretical opportunities bad opportunities that can occur, which is a reversal of the recycling of the water that goes between America and Great Britain. And that particular current, which has a technical name, surfaces in a particular way. And if it reverses, there's an immediate change in temperature that affects a lot of the world. It is unlike, and by the an immediate reversal in science is some number of decades, not one day. So that's the liberty that the movie took. So as much as I'd like to fearmonger, let's make sure we get the science right. Let me give you an idea of how depressed one should be to answer your question. It's highly unlikely that there will be cap and trade or carbon tax legislation in the next 6 years, because the current president won't be able to get anything done in his second 2 of 4 years. If he's reelected in his second term, it's highly unlikely he could bring that kind of stuff out. And if he loses, he'll lose undoubtedly to a Republican candidate who is presumably not in favor of this. So you have 6 more years of inaction on putting a price on carbon. And that's a fundamentally big problem in society, because without it, the cheap carbon, which is one of the primary accelerants of this, the technical problem that's causing global warming, is not going to get fixed. The modeling indicates that there is somewhere between a 10 to 15 year period during which time we can statistically change the number of parts per million that are likely to occur of carbon in the atmosphere. And there's a lot of people who believe that there's a point of almost no return sometime in our lifetimes, 10, 20 years from now. And the reason it's a point of no return is because these are dynamic feedback systems, and once things start to melt, and the disaster scenarios, which in the worst case, and again, these are the less likely scenarios, say that by 2050 you can have much, much greater sea level rise than is currently forecast. Even in 100 years, the 1 to 2 foot kind of sea rises, which will be common, are enough to affect roughly 500 million people, and we lose parts of Florida and things like that. And the effect, of course, is much greater in the northern hemisphere. There's not that many people in the southern hemisphere at the pole, but for obvious reasons. But for the northern hemisphere, it's a huge, huge shift. So imagine when all the methane comes out of the permafrost in northern Siberia, which is, no one knows how much that is, and of course that contributes further to
positive feedback.
In a negative feedback,
yeah, right.
Negative positive feedback cycle.
Right.
So the sum of all of that is a pretty bleak thing. The problem that I see is that self-interest always ends up trumping doing the right thing. If you look at the polluters, who are primarily the US and China today, with respect to coal, for example, it's fundamentally in our local interest to continue to mine and build those things. And so ultimately, my own view is it's going to take some kind of an event, which won't be this recycling of this particular current, but it'll be something else, and some kind of a conversation among the leaders where we all say, presumably without television cameras going, what are we going to do about this? Because everybody has children and everybody has grandchildren. And the science is so obvious and so serious. I don't think it's going to happen very soon. It'll happen earlier in Europe. In China, they're doing it because it's good business and because otherwise they'll have riots in the steel mills. But even then, it's insufficient. And all the modeling says that even with the current reductions, which are modest, things like the 20% renewable fuel standards and so forth, we're nowhere near an acceptable number of parts per million, even under those business as usual cases. And all the modeling indicates we need a reduction of 60 to 70% of current emitted carbon, and then it takes 20 or 30 years for that to get reabsorbed. So this is a huge issue, right? It's literally as large as nuclear proliferation.
It's probably the toughest challenge the human race has ever faced. And the problem with it is that if we get up, whatever it is, 500, 600, 800 parts per million, that the CO2 lasts in the atmosphere, the majority of it, 4,000 years. So it's continuously feeding back positively more and more and accelerating. And a couple of feet of sea level rise is almost a certainty, but if the Greenland ice, the glaciers in Greenland, if the Greenland ice cap goes, if the Antarctic ice caps start to go, then it'll accelerate far beyond that, and you could have 10 meters by the end of the century or the early part of the next century. The thing the scientists have been consistently wrong about is how bad it is.
Yeah, it's worth
they
saying
haven't been wrong about, they haven't said that it's worse than it is. They've always said that it's not as bad as what they say 2 years later. And 2 years later, they're constantly having to modify their models with this additional understanding of feedbacks like the methane.
The problem has actually gotten worse since the IPCC report of 2 years ago, and I'll refer you to a whole bunch of studies that have been recently issued that sort of prove this. Why don't we keep going with more questions?
Well, no, but I think, if I can just follow up on that, the problem is insidious in the same way that AIDS is insidious because it's a sexually transmitted disease that doesn't show up for years later. This is insidious, and the metaphor that I would use is rabies. If you get bitten by a rabid animal, if you wait until you're symptomatic to take the inoculations, it's too late and you die. We cannot wait until we're symptomatic. The question is, can all of the self-interests on a global scale set that self-interest aside so that we can take action before we are symptomatic? Meaning before we're having, a continuous series of devastating storms and famines and so on. it's not in human nature to do that. So the question is, can we in media, can people in education, can you with all of your great tools and initiatives really convince people that we have to do something for our children? Because the only way that we ever think into the future, generally speaking as adults, is, well, we think about we got to put the kids through college. We got to make sure the kids are healthy. What's my job security? Take care of the kids. Now, some of us are more selfish than that. But my wife said, it's simple. You go after the moms. You know, if you want people to change on their utility bill in Texas from one power source that's green, or from a non-green power source to a clean power source, you talk to the moms. And they'll say, I don't care, sign me up, I care about my kids. And so, I believe that ultimately this has to be approached as a children's crusade. And every leader, every climate denier, every talk show radio host that's trying to preach doubt has to be challenged as someone who's affecting the lives of your children and has to be answerable to that. And that's the only way we're going to get things to change.
Yes, sir.
Oh, there we go. Hi, my name is Ben Parr. I'm the editor of Mashable. And before I begin, I just want to say that the San Francisco Giants have won Game 1 of the World Series.
Congratulations.
And so my question is for you, James, is you invented a lot of different technologies to create the first one, and it took years in order to do that. And I'm curious about what kind of technologies you had to invent and you think you'll have to invent in order to succeed with the second and third films, things with like the oceans, et cetera, to really explore the world of Pandora.
Well, I mean, we are going to be seeing the oceans of Pandora and the life forms, the ecosystems there. So we've got to do more with CG water, both underwater with the caustics and the lighting, the optics of bringing light through water, and with the surface of water, which is one of the big challenges in CG. But that's all doable. Those are just plugins. That's all. That's all an iterative process. The only sweeping change between now and when we release the second Avatar film is I want to natively author the film at a higher frame rate and project it at a higher frame rate. I want to get rid of the motion artifacting associated with 24-frame display.
Really?
Because, movies are way behind. They're a century out of date.
You'll do it at 48 or something?
48, 60, 72. We're looking at the efficacy of the different ones and different solutions
Another
for that.
Incredible invention if you pull it off.
Well, the projectors can do it right now.
Oh,
The projectors can run at 144 hertz, but they're not displaying, but they're still displaying 24-frame content at 144 hertz. The trick is, how do you display 48 or 60-frame content, multi-flashing it the way the 3D projectors do. So that's one little bump that I'm going to be working on. And then there's some software development that we're doing to make the process, our kind of real-time virtual production process, more intuitive, faster, more real-looking, more like the finished product. Right now, we work in a proxy resolution. We create a kind of a 1980s video game-looking end product. Then we give it to the visual effects company. They start over, mapping all new high-resolution assets to those low-res assets. They start all over and do it all again, and they come out with a photoreal end product. What we want to do is eliminate that middle step and start to close the gap between what our real-time looks like and what the finished photoreal looks like. I mean, eventually, 15 years from now, we should be working in real time in a photoreal image, almost like you do with photography. So it's getting to the point where it's indistinguishable from photography at the moment you're doing it, as opposed to waiting 6 months or a year to see those real-looking shots.
Let's get a couple more questions over here. Yes, sir.
Yes, Larry Edwards. I'm with NASA Ames Research Center, and actually I'm a co-investigator on the Mars Science Laboratory mission.
Yes,
and
thank you.
I was wondering if the zoom cameras do get deployed successfully on the rover and the rover lands, what you envision doing with the imagery that comes back from those cameras.
Well, it's interesting. He's talking about the Curiosity Rover, and originally what was proposed for the Mastcam, which is the eyes of the rover, was that it was a stereoscopic camera with zoom lenses, with quite a wide focal range, but I think it was a 10 or 11 to 1 focal length range, and that got de-scoped. you know, kind of one administration back, and then the rover mission got pushed 2 years because you can only do launch opportunities to Mars every 22 months or so. So it was essentially a 2-year push, and the push was caused by electromechanical problems they were having with servos in the transportation system of the rover. So it had nothing to do with the cameras. So I thought, well, wait a minute, here's an opportunity. Let me see if I can revive the zoom lenses that got taken out of it. Because what the zoom lenses allow you to do is, because what they wound up with was different focal length, fixed focal length lenses, which obviated 3D. It's like, I'm not going to stand still for this. So I flew to Washington, and I did something that doesn't happen too often in the science and space community. I actually got them to resurrect the idea of going with the more complicated camera that did put the mission just a tiny bit more at risk. But I said that the upside of this is that we can expand the amount of science that's being done by being able to zoom in on objects that are distant and get stereoscopic images of them. And I should also, so anyway, that was accepted on a provisional basis, meaning if we can deliver the zoom lens version of the camera before they have to fully, stack the spacecraft, then it'll fly. But there's one other interesting thing about that camera. It's also a motion series camera. So if it all goes according to plan, we will be shooting the first 3D movie on another planet. That's cool.
Let's have our go ahead.
Cameron, can you hear me, first of all?
Yep.
Hi. Virtual actors. How close are we to movies with virtual actors like Star Trek original series, whole new episodes with Mr. Spock, Captain Kirk, Harry Potter, it's 7 years old, not 17, throwing in a Blu-ray and like Octopussy.
I think it's a great idea. I think Sean Connery should come back as James Bond. I think William Shatner should play Kirk again the way he looked in 1965. But what I don't think should happen is that Marilyn Monroe should come back and star in a movie, because she's dead. As long as the actor's still there driving the performance and making the creative decisions, I think it's a great idea, and we can do it. I'm not volunteering, but somebody could do it. Clint Eastwood could play Dirty Harry.
Could you give the mic actually to the lady in the very back in the corner there has been wanting to ask a question for the whole evening. And I'm sorry, sir, this will have to be the last question because we're actually running over.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Avatar changed the experience of going to a movie. It changed the whole movie experience. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how that same technology can be used to change other types of experiences. Maybe it's how consumers buy things, or how people, the manufacturing industry, or perhaps even, you're talking about convincing people to change their behavior and getting world leaders to change their decisions on how to make the planet a better place. So I'm wondering how that kind of technology could be applied in those areas.
I've been encouraging people in the neuroscience fields to look into the effect of stereoscopic versus 2D imaging on memory writing and memory retention. And I haven't gotten very far because they all have their stuff that they're doing that's all grant funded already. But I did talk to some researchers in Seattle, a place called iLabs, who have done a lot of studies with babies. And they're sticking babies into like a superconducting quantum interference device scanner and then doing
Let's
stuff.
Discuss this.
Yeah, as one does.
Take one baby and just
babies, just stick the baby
there.
in the big magnet. But they found some really interesting things. If they act out a social scenario in front of the baby will engage and have a certain response. If they show the same social scenario to the baby on a large panel video display that occupies the same field of view, zero response. They basically obviated the whole baby Einstein idea that babies' minds will be engaged by these moving images and colors and sounds and all that. Because what they found is that even at the age of 5 or 6 months, the baby knows it's a flat piece of video, and they know it's symbolic. Somehow it falls into a symbolic category as opposed to into a real category, and it has no effect on them. They don't learn language. So I'm thinking, wouldn't stereoscopic imagery be kind of halfway in between those two situations? And what if neuroscience actually showed us that people learned more, remembered what they saw more vividly and for a longer time and in more detail? What would the impact of that be to education? Because education is in the toilet in this country, you know, and we need some help. And how about something that could leverage the efficacy of teachers and educational systems to actually teach kids more in the few hours that they actually have their attention these days, after they've, you know, cut away hours in programs and the arts and all that sort of thing? What if we could make some stereoscopic teaching tools that would actually help us with education? Again, I don't know if the neuroscience is being done to support that. Anecdotally, I believe that people do remember more when they see in 3D versus 2D, because that's how we make a distinction between what's real and what's canned.
So if James Cameron were just in technology as an entrepreneur, he would be a genius entrepreneur. If he were just a director in Hollywood, he would be one of the most successful Hollywood directors ever. If he were an environmentalist, he would be one of the most passionate and successful advocates for a cause that we all should care an awful lot about. As an innovator and as an entrepreneur, his real genius is that he is all of those things. And I think that now we know that my introduction was not sufficiently positive as to what you have done and also what you are going to do for us as citizens of the world. So thank you so much, and thank you all.
That's very sweet.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That was so sweet. Those words mean a lot.
Really good. Really good.
Well, I'm having a great time.
Thank you.
Well, Jim and Eric, I think I speak for all of us. There's not many events we have at the Churchill Club that end with a standing ovation. And I think in 25 years, this is definitely one of the more magical events. And I look forward to the Google subs roaming the ocean to map it, with their permission, of course. And then, Jim, you mentioned, Arnold, and, Arnold's going to be available soon. Yeah, it might be a role in Avatar 2.
You're trying to cast him into Avatar 2 and 3?
Do a cameo.
But
he wanted to play the iceberg in Titanic.
He wanted to play the iceberg in Titanic.
But Jim, thanks for sharing your perspective and the stories with us so freely. It's obviously been a fascinating and inspiring conversation. Eric, thank you for guiding it so adeptly. On behalf of everyone watching tonight, we wish continued success to both of you. As a gesture of our appreciation, we have the well-known Churchill T-shirt.
Okay, good. Thank you so much.
And I must add, in your last movie, which was
not
pretty
available in stores.
In your last movie, you featured a T-shirt of Stanford, which we appreciate. And so in the next movie...
Right. Okay. Consider it done.
And finally, Fora.tv will be featuring this program on demand, so if you'd like to share it with your friends and colleagues, please direct them to Fora.tv on the web. Thanks again to our sponsors, Accenture and UC Berkeley. And please direct your attention to the screens, I think, to find out if you're one of the lucky winners of our prizes tonight, donated by Altec, Lansing, Cisco, Fenwick & West, Plantronics, and Sony. Congratulations to our winners, and thanks again for Jim and Eric for a magical evening.
Thank you.
Can we go this way?
I think that's this way.
Thank you, Jeremy. Fantastic.
Things to you so quiet.